And you guys are live.
All right. Another day of our Frontline stream. We'll wait for a few more people to hop on here. Well, another significant day as we talk about the ongoings in the Middle East here, with the Prime Minister still out in the United States, meeting with other top brass, meeting with Pete Hegseth, as you saw earlier today, some United States senators. Once again, a day in which the whole world that is, really focused on the situation in Gaza is keeping a watchful eye on Washington, D.C., and anything that could come out of these meetings here between the Prime Minister and top U.S. leadership. Once again, we are live on YouTube over here and then TikTok over here. So if my eyes keep darting back and forth, that's the reason there. It is pretty peculiar to a lot of people, particularly all of us, that watch all this very closely, to see the way that these meetings, between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump were added so last minute to the schedule yesterday. A second meeting at the White House, and you heard the president talk about it very candidly with members of the press, saying that he wanted this conversation to encompass largely, almost exclusively, the situation in Gaza, and the stance that he has held is that he wants to get a deal done in Gaza as quickly as possible and is looking for an end to the war as quickly as possible. And you heard Special Envoy Steve Witkoff talking about the negotiations of where they stand. And I got to tell you, to hear Special Envoy Steve Witkoff speak about the negotiations with Gaza and provide such clear detail on where they are, the impasses that they have overcome, the impasses that remain, where they go from here, really gives a lot of indication that it does seem as though that progress is at the very least being made on all these talks here. He was talking about how there was like four different hurdles that they had to overcome. Now they're down to one. We kind of have a good idea of what that one impasse is, which is the day after Gaza. Who's going to be controlling the Gaza Strip once the war is over? uh, Even more so than that, what Hamas's status is going to be inside of the enclave once the war is over. So these are all the big conversations, that are currently ongoing here, and that there needs to be decisions made upon here. Um, we heard from the president today, spoke about Gaza. I want to read this quote for you, which he said, "I think we have a chance this week or next week for a ceasefire in Gaza, but nothing definite in war. But there's a very good chance we'll have a settlement or an arrangement of some kind this week." So he continues to speak very, very positively about the possibility of getting a deal done here. And I hear the back and forth, and I hear the debate with pundits. It's just like, how true is this? Are we really close to getting a deal done in Gaza? Is he just saying this? Is he, just boasting, without anything to back it up? Here's what I would say to this. Um, the president has spoken so positively and so extensively about getting a deal done in Gaza over the last 2 weeks that if he doesn't, it would be a pretty significant knock to his political capital, particularly when it comes to foreign affairs. Because you look at, what the president has done so far in this administration, he has wins that he can point to on the domestic front. He has wins when it comes to the economy, and you see the way that the market has been doing and some of the all-time highs that it's been hitting. He can point to immigration and to the border and the way that these crossing numbers have dropped significantly. He's still kind of, depending, where you put the trade conversation, and tariffs and stuff, he is still looking for that big win on foreign affairs, particularly when it comes to these conflicts here. Um, has not been able to get a deal done yet in Ukraine, and so far has not been able to bring the situation home in Gaza. There was a ceasefire that happened a couple of months ago, certainly got some hostages out, certainly bringing Idan Alexander home is a win that he's going to be pointing to, but has not been able to bring either one of these major conflicts that is ongoing to a close here. And that is leaving himself open to take criticism, potentially from uh, political opponents, or those in the political space. So that's why it is purely speculative, but I would have to think that they are making some pretty tangible progress when it comes to these ceasefire negotiations here. Now, I mean, let's define the word progress, right? I mean, Steve Witkoff kind of laid it out that there were four impasses that they were trying to move past the other day, and now there's one that they're trying to get past here. Okay. Well, this one impasse, that everyone is talking about here is a huge one, which is the day after Gaza. In fact, I mean, no one has been able to find an answer to this. No one has been able to draw up a conclusion of who's going to be in control of the Gaza Strip once the war is over. And we have talked about this every day that we have done one of these streams here. And I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it is so important because it ultimately dictates the likelihood of brokering peace in the region here and a sustainable peace in Gaza. I mean this is the cornerstone and like the big entry point to this whole broader conversation of peace around the region here. Hamas has been very clear. They would like a deal that leads to the end of the war in a way that the war cannot restart, which de facto means Hamas will remain in power in Gaza. They will remain the ruling authority inside of the enclave. Israel and the United States have very publicly said that is a no go for them. But I ask you again, is there a world in which Israel and the United States could stomach, for the sake of getting a deal, for the sake of getting this across the finish line, a situation in which Hamas is still the ruling authority in Gaza, is still calling the shots, but they don't have the ability to threaten Israel, which the prime minister has spoken about again and again. In fact, you even heard the president the prime minister re-up that once again today in the statement that they put out cannot be allowed to cause harm or threaten the state of Israel. That is the line that the Israelis are drawing in the sand at this point. Is there a way that that needle can be threaded for the sake of getting peace here? I think that that is going to be the big thing that ultimately decides how these next couple of days go. But I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on any of this. If you have any questions here, give us an idea of what you're thinking. If you think that it's possible we're going to get a ceasefire, if you don't think that we will. Um, Good question here from Steve P. Is Israel letting reporters into Gaza to do some truthful reporting, or are you guys still banned from doing any real investigative reporting there? News Nation has personally sent a letter to the Israeli government demanding access inside of the Gaza Strip. It has been a call that has been coming from news outlets for over a year now at this point. Still, access into Gaza is completely restricted based upon the Israelis at this point. And this is a particular issue that many in the international press have been calling for a resolution to. That the enclave is still closed off as the war goes on. And, it's like on the one hand, you see the Israeli perspective here, which is there's a war going on, it's a contained environment, and they don't want anything to impede that. I can, from a 20,000-foot view, understand that there as well. But on the other hand, there's actually an image, little, probably it was published a year and a half ago, and you see all of these reporters that are standing on the gates of Rafah that are looking over the gates into the enclave. trying to get any look of what is going on here. Every piece of information, every piece of video, every photo that is coming out of the Gaza Strip right now is either coming from the Israelis or it is coming from the wire services that are operating out of Gaza. But keep in mind, everything that comes out of Gaza, somebody has a say over exactly what is being depicted in Gaza, either the Israelis or Hamas. I mean, there is no independence that is operating in Gaza, and I think that that is an important thing to understand. It's not just Gaza. I mean, you could say similar things about places like Iran, for example. The images that come out of a country such as that are highly manicured, and it's an important aspect of all of this to understand here. So then you would kind of move on to the big picture here, right? Um, the president is remaining very insistent at this juncture that he wants his peace deal here. Okay, so why does he want this peace deal so badly in Gaza? I mean, he even said it yesterday. He said it's just like he wants to see the war ended as quickly as possible. It's the other elephant in the room that we've talked about rather extensively over the last couple of days, which is brokering a broader peace in the region here. You hear the foreign minister of Syria's comments in recent days saying that they would like Iran to stop meddling in their affairs. And it seems as though that there is a window of opportunity open in order for the possibility of diplomatic relations to be open up between Syria and Israel. We've talked about Lebanon a few times the last couple of days. Saudi Arabia is the big piece on the chessboard, though, that certainly everybody wants. And the president really, really wants to deliver a peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia and opening up diplomatic relations there. Um, that is, like the other element to all of this is that the prime minister, that the prime minister, they would love to see a peace deal open up. They would love to see diplomatic relations opened up. But Saudi Arabia's longstanding position has been that the situation in Gaza, more broadly, the issue of Palestinian statehood, needs to be addressed first. That has been their longstanding position when it comes to opening up ties with Israel, and that really has not changed up to this point, especially with what we have seen over the last few months when it comes to the humanitarian situation in Gaza. That has certainly caused them to dig their heels in the sand on this one a little bit more. But the president has been very clear that this is the deal that he is looking for here, the broader peace in the region. One of my producers actually just flagged this to me here, this statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier. And I think that it articulates the Israeli stance here very closely, which is Israel wants a peace deal. President Trump wants a peace deal, but the Israeli position is not at any price. And that's where we have seen the hangup here between these two sides is that Israel does not want to leave anything on the table. They do not want to have a situation in which they withdraw their troops from the enclave and are in a position in which they could be threatened by Hamas again. Um, that's going to be the thing that they are going to continue to stump on until the threat to Hamas is totally eliminated here. And it's hard to say, like what are the goalposts, right? When it comes to that, because I mean we've been here in and out since October 8th, 2023. And I remember getting into Israel on October 8th, 2023, and Hamas demonstrated pretty significant capabilities to fire rockets at Israel, long range rocket capabilities, the abilities to threaten Tel Aviv, even some of the northern communities, that were up here as well. Um, they really demonstrated an ability in order to touch surrounding areas here in Israel. They don't really have that ability anymore. All that we have really been able to see Hamas do is threaten some of these communities in the south with their rocket fire. And we've seen some alerts going off in the south in recent days, but not much that gets outside of what they call the Gaza envelope. A lot of these communities that are just outside of the Gaza Strip itself. That being said, the fighting that is still ongoing inside of Gaza is very intense, which I think is surprising a lot of people here in Israel, that this fight, this war, has, maybe not that it's been ongoing as long as it has, but that there has been such intense fighting for as much as we have seen. Uh, we heard the opinion given by someone earlier today, from one pundit, who shall remain nameless, but their position was that there's no way, shape, or form that you can say Hamas, that Hamas has won this war. That Israel has outright won it because they have dismantled Hamas's capabilities. I would disagree with that, just with the way that Hamas is still causing there to be intense fighting inside of Gaza. You just saw multiple IDF troops killed the other day. This is the second time that we've seen these ambushes in Gaza that have led to, about a half dozen or so IDF troops being killed in single episodes. Um, there have been so many incidents that you have seen, in Gaza in recent days and recent weeks. And at the end of the day, you have seen some of these Hamas battalions showing the ability to reform in Gaza. At this juncture, the IDF says that they have 65% operational control. Hamas has said that they have about 20% operational control, and there's about 15% no man's land. There's the element to all of this here, and I've made this analogy on these before. In 1945, when Nazi Germany fell, Nazism was not outright destroyed. So we have talked about, this Israeli goal of the eradication of Hamas. Are you going to be able to totally eradicate Hamas? Is a question that many in the Israeli public are asking. And there are legitimate questions of if that is something that can realistically happen here. So that is why you have these broad conversations about the day after in Gaza and what is all of this going to look like here. Is there a world in which the Palestinian Authority takes over Gaza? Is there a scenario in which Hamas, their leadership, the leadership that isn't already in Qatar, is there a situation in which the leadership in Gaza totally leaves Gaza and takes refuge in Qatar or another country that's around the region? Who knows? But no one has been able to figure that one out yet, of exactly what the other side of this war is going to look like. And I keep hammering this point home, but that is the one that we are all asking on the ground here. And that is, because the gap to bridge between these two sides is just so wide right now. On the one hand, you have the Israeli position, which is, Hamas must be eradicated. They must never be able to threaten Israel again. And on the other hand, Hamas's stance is we want the war to end immediately after this 60-day ceasefire. The fighting will not resume again, which allows them to stay in power. It's a pretty wide gap I don't know how one would necessarily be able to negotiate past that there. So that's the element to all of this that I would say, people are really wondering at this juncture. See this question here. This is a good one. Do you really think that they want peace? It's a really good question. And you have a lot of people, who ask that question here. And so I think it depends, when, right? If you ask the Israeli leadership and you ask the average Israeli publicly, they would say that they do dream of a day in which there is peace in the region, in which there is a day in which they can stand shoulder to shoulder, with all the other countries that are in the region here. But you even heard the prime minister say it today, this concept of peace through strength. First comes the strength, then comes the peace. And what you seem to gather is that there's a belief that the threats need to be eliminated before there can be peace. Do you see that distinction there? So there are a lot of people in Israel who believe that the objectives of the government is that they want to keep the war going to the point that Hamas is destroyed. And once Hamas is destroyed, then there can be peace. So you ask a very good philosophical question. Do they really want peace? The end goal is the end question, I think is actually, a pretty fair, clear cut answer. Yes, long term peace, peace throughout the region. But the means of achieving that long term peace, um, there does not seem to be widely held belief among the Israeli government that peace can be attained today simply by having a ceasefire today. There seems to be a belief that there are threats that need to be eliminated first. Now, there are some in the Israeli public that believe that the ceasefire should come today. I mean, you see the demonstrations in Hostage Square every Saturday night, in which some people are calling for the Israeli government to make a deal, any deal, in order to get the hostages out. There are 50 hostages still in Gaza, about 20 or so are still believed to be alive. And there are people who want the Israeli government to cut a deal, no matter how um, no matter how damaging that deal, shall we say, could be to Israel, no matter how much it could work to the benefit of Hamas in order to get those hostages out. The Israeli government's, the cabinet stance so far has been that that is not something that they are prepared to do, to cut a deal that is so damaging to them, that is so lopsided in favor of Hamas, that it leaves them open to threats down the road, which they would argue in turn threatens that concept of peace that you ask about. That's the distinction, that I think that a lot of Israelis, realistically, those are the discussions that are taking place in kitchen tables. Now, I will say there is more optimism in Israel in the wake of the 12 days war, because they believe that the crux of the tension in the region and the base of all the instability here, the funder of Hamas and the funder of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, who, that's something else we should talk about. The threats that the Houthis are able to show right now. But all the other groups in the region, that they believe Iran was dealt a significant blow. And there's an argument to be made that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been given quite a bit of political capital and lenience in recent days with the way that they have carried out these successful operations against Hezbollah and the successful campaign against Iran. Maybe there is more lenience that is there. Who knows? Who knows at this juncture? But we shall see how all this goes. And taking a look at some of these other questions, that are going on here. Let's see here. This is an interesting question that just came in. Has the West's reputation suffered over its stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and will it matter when the conflict ends? Hmm, that is actually a really good philosophical question there. Um, Look, I mean, just spending a lot of time, in the region here in recent months. I mean, there is, I mean, an inherent distrust for the West for many that are here in the region. And I mean, we can have an awe about that all day long, but I mean, that's just like the way that it is in the region. And certainly leadership in Tehran definitely feels that way. And those tensions have existed for a long time. But I mean, even, gosh, I mean, in so many of these other countries here as well. I mean, you've met people in the UAE, who feel that way, and what I would say is that, the position, of the West hasn't really changed that much. I mean, this is kind of how it's been for a long time. Um, I was reminded of this story, with Bill Clinton, and he was talking about, the president of France, was talking about the two-state solution in the Palestinian territories, and how he was ridiculed for this and criticized for this. But Bill Clinton also, supported the kind of same idea, and people in Israel loved him. And people ask, okay, so why is that? Why is that the case? And because Bill Clinton responded to that is because Israel knows that the United States is always going to be there for Israel and is always going to be in the trenches next to Israel. Um, you saw that even with the mounting pressure on the ground in the United States, with all the demonstrations on college campuses. You could say all you want that it seems as though that the position among some Americans is changing. Statistically, it's not. I mean, statistically, overwhelmingly, the American public supports Israel. And statistically, every government has so far supported Israel. That doesn't mean that that isn't going to change one day. But statistically speaking, the American public, still their position has really not changed on this subject matter here, despite the size of some of these demonstrations that have been ongoing. Europe, maybe a bit of a different story. France, for example, um, I think that there's a significant argument to be made that France's support of Israel, optically speaking, looks to be less than it has been. The UK, I mean, the UK is the low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's the obvious one. I mean, you compare this government compared to even the conservative government under Rishi Sunak, in which Rishi Sunak said, "We are rooting for you to win." And now you see, um, the comments that are being made by the leadership of the current UK government. Okay, I mean, clearly, there has been a change in sentiment among the British leadership under this Labour Party government towards Israel. Here's the important thing to remember about all this, though. Israel doesn't care. Israel does not care about what France thinks, and they largely don't care about what the UK thinks. I mean, it is. But we even heard it from someone in the Israeli government the other day. The only opinion that they care about is the United States. And right now, um, it's pretty hard to argue that there has ever been a stronger, more close knit relationship between Israel and the United States. I mean, you just saw the United States carrying out strikes on another sovereign state a couple of days ago. So, I mean, when you ask that question there, has the West reputation suffered over its stance on Israel? Potentially from people in the region. But I would argue, that the United States' stance, has been largely the same for a long time, and there's no indication that that's really changing anytime soon. And then, if you were to take the reciprocal of that question here, I mean, are there any indications, that the relationship between Israel and the United States could potentially wilter? I mean, it seems as though the support for Israel is at an all-time high right now, particularly with the government that was just elected by a pretty significant margin in the Electoral College. I mean, it's kind of hard to say any other way here. Right. Another good point there. Other countries: Spain, Ireland, South Africa. South Africa. I mean, this has kind of been, a stance that they have held for a long time, though. Um, but yeah, Spain, Ireland, even Scotland, has come out as well, and they've been, saying that they have not been fans of Israel as much publicly anymore. But again, I mean, you look at the United States. I mean, that is, the key alliance that is there. Um, I see Daniel's comment here. Things have shifted very, very significantly. You will never recover from this. But again, I mean, shifted with who? I mean, the Israeli stance, is that the only country that matters is the United States, and I mean, they're prepared to go it without Ireland. I mean, they're prepared to go it without Spain. I mean, look at the contributions that Spain makes to NATO. I mean, they are hands down the lowest contributor to NATO at this juncture. Their position is that the only country that matters, in their opinion, is the United States. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I mean, that is the stance of the Israeli government here.
All right, Robert, I think we've taken up enough of your time, so we should let you go.
All right, 30 minutes. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. And I see more questions that are coming in, but feel free to send them our way, to my News Nation email or any of my social media platforms at Robert Sherman TV. Thank you so much for everyone who's been tuning in, and We'll continue to do this again in the future.